Ecuador. I live in Quito. And I'm dedicated to environmental issues. I suppose that during your schooling you have had quite a lot to do with environment. Nature, the use of forests, the value of oceans and different species. And that is what I'm going to talk to you about. But I don't limit my work only to nature and conservation. Mainly I focus on development. Why do we need forests and oceans and mosquitoes or bats? What's the use of that? Why should we care for that? And why can't we think of the future if we don't think about nature? Does it relate to economic growth, and how? Why is it so much linked to poverty, for example? So it's all this network of interest between nature, conservation, development, economic growth, addressing poverty, quality of life that I care about and that I work on. I'm going to start with a short video that I think you will enjoy. About the bees lately?
The bee populations are deteriorating, dying off.
The bees population is slowing down. The population is threatened, and we don't know yet what is happening. That is the most important challenge at this moment, is discovering why the bees are not stable anymore, are not growing. On the contrary, the population is slowing down. And something is happening that we don't know. There are a lot of speculative theories, whether it is agrochemicals, whether it is the climate. Something is happening to the bees that the population is not in a good state. Now, we can all do without honey. I mean, if we don't have bee honey, we probably can sweeten our lives in a different way. The problem is that lots of people in this planet live on the economy of the bees. Number one. Number two, the bees have a very important role to play where? In pollination. Especially in agriculture. Agricultural world cannot live without the bees. So the big question today is what is happening and how do we bring the bee population back? And therefore bring the economy back to the people who grow the bees, the honey, who produce it, and to the agricultural world that depend on pollination. Did you know, and I only learned this last week, that bee producers of the central part of the US pack their beehives in trucks in a part of the year to bring them to California, where when the weather will be better in California, release the bees in California, have them produce like, cows providing milk, then pack the beehives again and move them back to the original place. Now, I have several questions when I listen to these stories. The question is, who wins and who loses? Who is the winner in this process?
The producers.
The big producers. Very good. The winners are those producers who are dedicated to massive production of honey. Is that good?
No.
Could be. Good for them. It's good for them. The question is, are we in any way threatening the balance of the species of the original place and the destination place when we move them around? Number one. Number two, what do we do with the small producers? Because one of the interesting things in this planet is that when I don't have honey here because it's winter, I can get the honey coming from this other part of the planet where it is summer. If I produce all the year round the same honey from the same, and get it from the same producers, probably the small producers of that part of the world that used to provide the good to the rest of the world are not making any business anymore. And so I think we need to think about the losers and winners of this industrialized process of production, especially in the agricultural world. Nothing is black and white. There are lots of grays, and we have to try to understand the grays to see how we can support processes that are more equitable to the different communities in the world. And we will see with other products. For example, Chile used to export strawberries when it was winter in the north. And then the north invented and modified the genetics of the grapes and the strawberries in order to produce them during winter times. And Chile was left with no market. From one day to the other, you have a loser and a winner. And we need to think, how much do we want some to lose or to win? And how much to work towards something that keeps the functions of the planet moving and the societies that live around those functions in a state by which they can continue to survive economically and socially and environmentally. Have you read about tigers? Do you know how many live tigers in the natural world exist?
Isn't it like 10,100 or 11,000?
Sorry?
Either it's 1,100 or 11,000, something like that, right?
In the natural world, and that means in Asia, in the whole belt of Asia, from India to Russia, we have 3,500 tigers. 3,500. Who can guess how many tigers there are in captivity in the US only? Huh? 5,000. There are more tigers in captivity in the US, in private homes, in zoos, in circus, in whatever, than there are in nature. So something is wrong, isn't it? One of the things of the big success stories of WWF during this year is that we managed to bring the heads of state of all the countries that have tigers to a meeting to commit to conservation programs that would bring the tiger population back. Now, again, you can imagine the tiger is not valuable only because it's beautiful, but because it has a role to play. It has a role to play in the forest conservation, in water availability, in everything. But you know what was interesting, and this is one of the beautiful things of my work, is that you are not dealing only with a species, we are dealing with policies and politics. And guess what? Do you know who Putin is? The head, used to be the head of state of Russia. His daughter is a biologist interested in tigers. So we managed to bring Putin into the picture because his daughter asked him to. And he was the convener of this summit of heads of state in Siberia. And all the heads of state, because it was Putin, of course, accepted the invitation, and they all signed the agreement to bring back the population of tigers in Asia. So that's a success story, but it needed lots of work in research, in science, in making analysis of what the threats of the disappearance of this species would be to the region and to the world. It brought us into the political world, and it brought us into thinking who and how do we get these people into signing this agreement, and that was a great story. I don't remember the numbers. By the way, I'm not a biologist. I have nothing to do with nature. I can hardly recognize an avocado tree and differentiate it from a lemon tree. But these are the things that really bring passion in my life. These little turtles, they come from about 100 eggs, and only about 5 of them survive from every nest. And that is nature. So sometimes people will come and say, we have to save all the eggs. And that is also wrong. Because we would overpopulate a system by having too many of the species, in this case, the small sea turtles. Well, that's, you know, the panda is the symbol of WWF. And that's also a big story, especially because China has put a lot of effort and invested in conservation because of the panda. Maybe this is the story that today is affecting many of our lives. Who doesn't love a white bear, an Arctic bear, a polar bear? Since we are babies, we get these little, ¿cómo se dice? Stuffed animals of polar bears. Whenever we think of Arctic, or basically the Arctic, we think of the polar bear. And they live on ice. And the ice is melting. What do you do? Because the melting of the ice is the consequence of many things. You have probably heard of climate change. In climate change, there is no discussion about it anymore. There are some individuals who still who still fight against the whole science of climate change, but you cannot dispute it any longer. The ice is melting, and this bear population doesn't have any place to live in many parts of the Arctic. Some of them are disappearing in terms of the size of the population, and they are taking refuge in other parts where there wasn't a large population in the past. So something will happen there in the next couple of decades. But again, they eat certain fish, they have a role to play in the ocean, and they are threatened at this moment. Last week, we launched in the US, so those of you who are from the US, please, as from today, 1st of November, you will find in the US until January, a new bottle of Coca-Cola, which is white, aluminum, totally white, and with some bears at the bottom, and the cap of the bottle will have inside a message and a number for you to send it to Coca-Cola, and that will add to the funding that goes into the polar bear program that we launched yesterday. And it is an agreement between Coca-Cola and WWF, and I hate Coca-Cola.
I love it.
You will hear around in your discussions and in your studies that private sector is bad, that only NGOs, the non-governmental or environmental organizations are doing good work. That's not true. There are some NGOs that are terrible. The majority are wonderful. There are some private companies that are great. Others are terrible, as in everything. But this partnership between Coca-Cola and WWF just demonstrate that you can do very interesting things, and one of those is the protection of the polar bear, as well as water conservation. Ugly, isn't it? These animals in Africa are suffering from long droughts. Have you already studied something about droughts and famine in northern Africa? And the droughts are not taking place only in Africa. Do you know that 2 years ago in Brazil, in the Amazon, we had a drought? In the Brazilian Amazon, you could see the soil with the cracks, no green, no vegetation, everything died out. Something is wrong there, but particularly in the African continent. That will affect all these species. And of course, when you go into, this is a tropical forest, timber is still one of the big products of a forest. You have lots of timber companies, legal and illegal, cutting trees. And the impact of cutting a forest down is on the rivers, on water provision. When you cut the trees, the rain washes away the soil, takes it into the rivers, and of course that has several impacts. The soil is no longer on the ground in order to allow growth of native species. And number two, the rivers carry so much soil that many species of the water will die. And then all this soil goes into the ocean, which also has an impact. And the ocean, do you ever think about wildlife in the ocean? I used to think of wildlife only on land, the tiger and the elephant and the giraffe. But wildlife in the ocean is absolutely incredible, and probably is the one that we know less about. Number one, because we were not able to go deep enough into the ocean to learn and understand the dynamics of life in the bottom of the ocean. Now the technology is allowing us to go deeper and deeper and get several species that have been found there for the first time ever. And the wealth, the richness of natural life in the ocean is absolutely amazing. The big problem is that we cannot easily see what is happening underneath. If you take a helicopter and go over the forest, you will immediately see whether someone is logging, whether whatever is happening on the surface. But it doesn't matter how much effort you do to see in the bottom of the ocean or inside the ocean, you can't. You will only see what is happening there when there is something wrong. When you go out fishing and you come back with an empty boat. And that is happening. In Peru, the whole Peruvian system, the fishery system, went broke a couple of years ago because the species that Peru provided to the world disappeared because of overfishing. The same thing happened in Argentina. The same thing is happening in the Japan Sea. And we continue to overfish without taking any measure to ensure that the repopulation of the ocean takes place. And that is a real threat, not only because that beauty is lost, but because 60 of the population of the world eats fish. Can you imagine what will happen to the population the moment we are not able to bring the fish out? And that is a tremendous help. The good thing is that some large companies are working on the production of sustainable fish. Unilever, for example, will not buy any fish that doesn't come from sustainable fishing. And that means having the technical equipment to be able to harvest only the large size fish not to harvest the small ones that need to grow and reproduce in the ocean. That you don't bring into your net dolphins and turtles. That you don't mix into the same pot the eatable fish and the non-eatable fish. And it's not enough yet what we are doing. At the moment we are depleting the sea world, and we need to work more on that. I mentioned climate change. And climate change comes from lots of sources, but mainly emissions of CO2 from the industrial world. Today, and for the last more than 10 years, we have devised several processes by which we try to reduce the CO2 emissions. In factories like this one, new technology has been placed in order to reduce the emissions. And it includes a process by which you are paid back if you reduce your emission. There is a market, basically in Europe, that when you reduce, you get paid back. And that is an incentive for the industrial world to do better in terms of emissions. The other source, big source of emissions is what? Is? Cars, transport. Transport. And that includes airplanes also, but mainly cars. Cars and the transportation system, I would say, is one of the most serious one in terms of climate change. Deforestation. Until very recently, and maybe still today, you had large timber companies providing this equipment to locals in the forest. And they will pay back the equipment with timber. Enormous trees that have taken 100 or 200 or 500 years to grow, turned down in maybe 2 or 3 hours, and becoming timber for construction. With a lot of waste, because it's not an efficient equipment that will ensure that every part of the tree is well used. But that has happened for a long time. Now technology, satellites, allow you to know where trees are illegally being cut, and governments can do something about it. But it's not very easy to do something about it. In Ecuador, in Brazil, in Peru, in Colombia, in our region, or Indonesia, Malaysia, India, the government doesn't have sufficient systems to protect the territory, to look after the natural forests. So a lot of deforestation takes place without the authorities even knowing of what is happening. This is agriculture, monoculture. Today, the big threats, I would say, is soy plantations, palm oil, palm plantations, especially in Southeast Asia. Indonesia and Malaysia have enormous plantations of palm oil. The same thing with the southern part of Colombia, the northern part of Ecuador, not as big as in Asia, but equally important. And I should have brought that slide with me. I have a slide with all the products that have palm oil in it. And more or less everything that you think of during your daily lives has palm oil. From toothpaste to things that you eat, things that are cooked, soap, lots of things. And so the excuse is we need it. We need it for the market, and I'm sure we do. But the big problem is that instead of using land that doesn't have any forest anymore, we cut down forest to plant palm. That is the mistake of today. And obviously the damage to the natural ecosystem is enormous. And there are also interesting processes of, that provide certification to palm plantations that have been planted in areas that are already degraded and that have not cut natural forest down. And there are some big industries that will only buy oil if the origin of the oil is coming from those types of plantations. The same thing with soy. There is a round table of sustainable soy that, again, will provide and open markets and provide better prices for soy if you have done it in a sustainable way. What is sustainable? Not only not cutting down the forest, but not having so large extensions. One of the proposals, and it works, is to leave corridors of native forests in between these large plantations. So in these corridors of forest, you will provide a lodging site for all the, not for all, but for many of the species, insects, birds, and plants that originally were in the area. So that is a way of how to lower the impact of these large agricultural areas in all of our countries. But it's not enough. There has been an enormous loss of natural ecosystems that have been already affected, and of which we will never know what did it contain, because we did not have time to research and do work there to understand the dynamics of those ecosystems. When you look at the mountain, you can see beautiful mountains like the Cotopaxi that you probably saw. And here, I suppose this is Himalayas. And in Switzerland, you will see them, and in Nepal and wherever. And they also have a role to play. Usually, they are not very good lands when they are very steep for agriculture. But they have a role to play in especially the production of water. And water is the big threat of today. As fish is the big threat in terms of species, water is the element of life that is more threatened today. Do you know where Barcelona is? The city of Barcelona in Spain? A couple of years ago, Barcelona had no water. And they had to cut water use during certain hours in the city. The population was terribly upset because they had never had this. They used water, used and misused a lot of water. And suddenly the local authorities were telling them that there was not going to be water between 10 and 12 and that they have to be careful. But they also said that they had already decided what to do about it. To move north into a river, tube a river water into Barcelona, and that was the end of the problem. Do you think that was the end of the problem? It was the beginning of the problem. Yes. Number one, the city that felt ownership on that river that was higher north said, no way, that's my river, not yours. So you have no authorization to tube all the water into Barcelona. Big political crisis, the national government trying to mediate between these two cities on who owns the water. At the end of the story, the city who felt ownership of this river said, no, you're not going to tube it. And thank God it started to rain in the vicinity of Barcelona and they could satisfy their needs for water in town. But the option, if that had not happened, was that the new technology, wonderful technology of this planet, has invented an equipment to bring water from the sea, from the ocean, salt water, take the salt away and bring out drinking water. Fantastic, isn't it? Who can afford it? Quito? Cuenca? Can you imagine a tube of 500 kilometers coming into a town bringing drinking water from the ocean? And the expense of taking the salt desalinize, I don't know how you say it, desalinize water from the ocean and bring it to Barcelona. Perfect, because Barcelona is at the seaside. What about Cuenca? What about La Paz in Bolivia, Cordoba in Argentina, or think of your own countries? Think of a town that is far away from the coast. How will you bring drinkable water into those towns? No way. No way. Only the rich, very wealthy cities would be able to afford it, and not forever, because it will be a very costly operation. And that is what the threat is today in terms of water. If these mountains continue to lose the ice and therefore produce and provide less water to urban areas in our planet, we are in trouble. It doesn't mean just that that's a threat and we cannot do anything about it. It means that we have to do a lot of things about individual action. Individual action in every household, in every school, in every society, in every country. This is what we often see in our planet. Terrible. And it's everywhere. In more or less every country. In every continent, sorry. And these are not the things we like to see. But happen because we have a growing population. By the way, did you hear that we are now 7 billion in this planet?
Since yesterday at 2 o'clock.
Since yesterday at 2 o'clock. And I suppose about 1,000 children, babies, can say, I am the 7 billion one. The population is growing, and the carrying capacity of the planet is less and less. There is less space in several continents. There is less food to provide for these different societies. There is less funding to provide good quality education. There is less water. And we are not being very creative in this planet to support all this population. Sometimes I have real struggles in relation to what is the carrying capacity and how truth is the carrying capacity formula of today's world. Because I have a feeling that in terms of food, for example, food availability, there is enough food. We are not using it right. Raise your hand if you like meat. Raise your hand if you don't like meat. Okay. Do you know, I'm going to ask some tough questions. How much water do you need to produce a kilo of beef that you are going to eat today? Just a guess. 1 gallon per kilo. 250 liters per kilo. More guesses. Be wild. Be wild.
200,000 liters? 200,000 liters?
200,000 liters. That's a bit too much.
500 gallons.
500, 5 por 4, 20, 2,000. 2,000. Not big enough. No, big enough, big enough. 1,700 liters of water. 1,700. 1700. For that piece of meat that you have in your plate. The big thing with meat, there is a myth with meat. the medical doctors, the pediatricians in my time used to say that we need to eat meat every day to have a healthy child. Today, the same medical doctors say, wow, be careful. Don't eat meat every day. Have meat 2 or 3 times a week, no more than that. I try to have twice a week. Because who has eaten quinoa in Ecuador? A grain, quinoa. It is a little ring. Have you had it already? Okay. You know, the argument for eating meat is that it has lots of protein. But you needed grass, you needed grain, you needed lots of land, you needed workers, lots of water to produce the grain, to produce the grass, to have the grass there, to take the transportation, to take the cow to the matadero. What is it?
Butcher.
Huh? The slaughterhouse, that's it, the slaughterhouse. Then the packaging, the transport to move the packaging, that meat into the market. And you needed a whole army of vets, of veterinarians, lots of things. All those costs put together will add up to the amount of water to wash, to keep things clean, to keep things growing, to keep things moving, and to have the final piece of meat in your dish with lots of protein. But I can have twice as much protein with quinoa. Ask the school to give you quinoa the rest of the week. how we are producing the meat. It's not wrong to have a cup of coffee or 10 cups of coffee every day. It is how do we produce the coffee. Is the water sustainably used, or are we wasting water in those farmlands? Are we producing and recycling water in the system? Agricultural world is the one that uses more water of all social systems. And most of it is misused. We just let water run And that is breaking the system away, because sooner or later we are not going to have enough water to be able to sustain those farming practices. So, two messages from that. Number one, try to think if you need meat every day. And if not, look into Google and see in your own countries and continents what are the other sources of protein that you can use instead of meat every day. Number one. And number two, try to be selective with what you eat. Energy. We have gone through water, we have gone through food, and the third one is energy. Oil, energy produced from oil sources is in question. We know that that's the main source of pollution and emissions and climate change. And one of the good things is that the oil price is going higher. Why do I say it's a good thing? Because only if it's very expensive, we will invest in new technologies that are going to be cheaper. As long as oil is cheap, we will live with it, because it's a comfortable position to be in. So if you question the leaders of the technological world in the technological countries, they will say, we don't invest because why invest if people continue to use oil? So let's pray that the prices of oil go so high that the researchers in the technology world will bring up new alternatives. But we already have technologies. That is one. These windmills are also being put in the ocean. Many people were concerned about birds that clashed against the cusps, yeah, the blades, and that was a risk for bird life. Now the equipment has a sonar that you cannot hear the noise, but the birds can, so they stay away from it. There is always an evolution of alternatives, but we have wind options, we have solar options. In the UK, in London, I've seen buildings now being fed 80–70% by solar energy. And that is a country that has light only a few hours a day and only a few months a day. So the opportunity for a country like Ecuador that has 12 months of light and 12 hours of light a day is enormous. But we haven't the technology investment that we should be putting into for solar energy. But that is a great opportunity at a very low cost. And there are other alternatives. You have seen now electric cars, electric bikes, electric motorbikes. Every sort of transportation system now is driving towards new sources of energy and the reduction of oil. That is something that we have to think about. And of course, think about it in personal terms. We have to reduce the amount of energy we use. When you connect your computer or your cell phone, you usually leave it there for the night instead of charging it for half an hour or 1 hour and disconnecting it. Every equipment that is connected to the plug in the wall, even if it doesn't have the equipment at the end of it, is using energy. The use of electric lights in your home, in your office, in school, etc., it's one little bit that adds to the consumer world of a source of energy that is very valuable and that we should be using more wisely. So local and individual action counts, and that's my last message. And thank you. Eat well, soup, and eat less meat, and drink local water.